All right, ladies, I have Christy Bonner with me today. I am so excited to share her with you all. I met you at Yoga Landing in Chattanooga during my teaching time there. And I found that you had this sort of quiet, steady presence. But you're one of those people that quite clearly has a lot of wisdom inside of you, but you were never like bold and audacious about it. It was like if you looked into you, you were going to find a jackpot of goodness, but you were always kind of quiet and just there as well at the studio. And I'm so excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Let me say this about your class that almost makes me emotional from the start is I didn't get to go to your class a lot because I was in a season where I was working full time as a hospice chaplain. And I also was in yoga school when you were teaching and starting to teach yoga at the sports barn. And so I went to a lot of classes at the sports barn, but whenever I could, I would go over to Yoga Landing. And occasionally I got into some of your classes. And what I remember is they were challenging, but there was this space and I felt held. And you don't always feel held by a yoga teacher. And I don't even have words for it, but it was this experience of knowing that not only did I have the community of the class, but the teacher was there through her wisdom, through her words, supporting me. And I think that that is something very special about you. And because I was drawn to you, I ended up going to about 3 of your workshops and just totally impressed with your wisdom, with how articulate you are, but also the graciousness in the way that you speak. And listening to your podcast, I was so impressed with how you are a teacher, but you're also so great at reflective listening, of just capturing what somebody said. And I think that's a rare skill set. And so I just want to encourage you. You're on a great path and you're helping a lot of people. And I also think you know how to perceive and take care of yourself too. And that's hard because helpers naturally want to help. That's something I know I've struggled with a lot in my life is just wanting to help at the expense of myself. But I see you as a person who's also pouring into yourself and teaching others how to do that. So thank you. And thank you for doing this podcast. It's enriching. Now that I've tuned in, I'm gonna keep tuning in.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to be here.
Well, gosh, what a beautiful reflection. Literally, I have tears in my eyes just from being on the receiving end of that. It's always so neat to hear the impact that you have because, we're just going out and being a channel for our work and doing our thing and not really thinking much about it. And it's just so great to hear that it was impactful for you and at a time when you just had like so much fullness in your life and still today. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to give our listeners a little bit of context about who you are. So, Christy is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is a certified Enneagram teacher, and she is also a yoga teacher at the 500-hour level. You were a chaplain for 15 years. You've written 6 books, one of which is literally called Freedom from Shame. So just like a nod to what some of our conversations are going to be about later. You're a writer. Gosh, there's so many beautiful aspects of who you are. Christy, I'd love to know what is just so nourishing in your life right now. It could be physically, or mentally, or relationally, or emotionally, like just some really good parts.
Oh, wow.
Now.
Lots of things come to mind. I will say that I have a daughter who, my husband and I joke, her middle name is Fun. She is always thinking about what's next. What can we do to have fun? She wants to play. She wants to have dance parties. And I have had a very serious archetype throughout my years, a very responsible soul, a soul that's helping others. And so all of a sudden, God plants fun in my life. And she's just incredible, and that is helping to heal parts of me that
Mm.
don't need to be so serious, don't need to be so responsible. And I think I'm hopefully helping her to be a little more grounded, although sometimes I don't know if that's working. But she is very soulful and nourishing to me. I
Mm.
have a son as well who just turned 2 this week, so that's a big moment in our family's life. So a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old who's in kindergarten. And as far as things that are nourishing, I have great friends. I went on a walk with 2 friends this week who are psychotherapists as well. So, we can just go straight to deep and go into those deep conversations because that's who we are. And so I feel like my friendships are nourishing. Uh, Church is a nourishing place for me just to go and find time for quiet and solitude. Retreats, even though they don't look like what they looked like in the past. I used to do weekend retreats, and the whole weekend was dedicated to me and
Yeah.
filling up my cup. Now it's like, okay, let me go to this Lenten retreat at the church that's only 2 hours. Or on
Mm.
Saturday, I had 2 hours to go to a retreat where it was a mindfulness retreat led by some of the same folks who had studied under Thich Nhat Hanh. So Plum Village, if you're familiar with that, they were from Magnolia Grove Monastery in Mississippi. And
Mm.
that was really nourishing. I found myself crying over the loss of Thich Nhat Hanh. I really hadn't allowed myself to feel his loss until I went to that retreat. But he's been a spiritual mentor in my life.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty cool to sit at the feet of those who had been at his feet. Like one of the men there was literally one of his right hand men for a little while. And so it was very inspiring to be there. But things like that, I'm really trying to be intentional to get in little nuggets of retreats. I can't do what I once could just because my life is very full and my kids have a lot of needs. But I do go to, restorative yoga retreat for 4 hours, and I just sign up for, what I can instead of the whole weekend because that's not possible now. I
Yeah.
hope it will be. There will be a point where my kids don't need me as much, but right now, at a newly minted 2-year-old and a kindergarten child, they have a lot of needs, and that's real. But I'm still finding space for myself. Oh, live music is really important. My
Mhm.
husband and I have been fortunate we went to a show last night and had a babysitter, and then we took our daughter to reflection riding for a concert this past weekend. So that's very
Cool.
nourishing.
What'd you get to do
Um,
last night?
it was a TEDx talk where people were telling their stories
Mhm.
and then singing songs that they had written related to their stories. And I
Oh,
love hearing a good story. It
yeah.
had me in tears when one of the artists was talking about a shooting that had happened at a nightclub in New Orleans in the 1970s. 32 people had died, and
Hmm.
she had a song that, told the story of that. So it was very enriching to
Yeah,
just
I love that
listen.
combination of storytelling, but also the artistic expression of it.
Yeah.
It's so healing and so humanizing. I find,
Mhm.
because of the work that I do, and I end up intermingling a lot with psychotherapists and the mental health community. And I don't know about you, but I find such nourishment in those people that you can just be deep and real with and not put on this facade of like, we've got all our shit together because like nobody does, right? We're all humans and it's
Yeah.
so weird and messy. And I want to just circle around the fun of your daughter
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that you said God, brought her into your life. And so I kind of want to bring our listeners up because one thing I failed to mention, but want to mention is that you have a master's in divinity, right? Like you have
Mhm.
this deep, studious part of you that has wanted to study God and relationships to God and people's relationships to God and support that. And your daughter coming in as fun as she is, it sounds like has really been activating this sort of like playful, fun part of you, or maybe it's not always been comfortable even, but you've been like working on accessing it and she's been a channel for that. And then the friends, I think that there is truly like so many women are very lonely in that depth and in that soulful aspect or in that realness and longing for friendships where they can share these truths. And it sounds like that's something that you've successfully created in your life, even amidst the chaos of motherhood or the busyness of balancing motherhood and career.
Yeah, I feel very blessed, and I also want to acknowledge that I have been in seasons where I had to work full time and have overtime with that was just part of my job. I you couldn't have the job as a chaplain without being willing to work, shifts and be there for emergencies. And so
Mhm.
I've had a very full-time job where I didn't have the space. And I have been intentional to cultivate that. So I do want to give myself some credit. I worked really hard so that I could create this space. But I want to acknowledge that everybody who's listening might not be in that season. And so sometimes creating that space is, a long conversation with a friend at the end of the night. Sometimes it's a short shower. Like we're all in different seasons. I remember when I worked as a hospice chaplain, I was a pediatric hospice chaplain as
Oh,
well. So I
yeah.
saw adult and pediatric clients. And the women who were caring for children who were dying, when I would talk with them about self care, they would be very real with me. Like, self care for me right now is a long shower, and that's all I'm going to get.
Mhm.
And so, if you're in a season where you don't feel like you have that space, just 5 minutes of yoga or a longer shower, I think you're deserving of that. First of all, I think often as women, we don't feel like we're worthy of that. And that's some messaging that we need to work on as women. And you have to be intentional to give yourself just a little more. But I do feel very grateful that I'm in a season where I can slow down a little bit and, find this time to take care of myself. It's very important, especially I know that we've talked about the Enneagram. You came on our podcast,
Mhm.
the Enneagram plus Yoga podcast, which we recently decided, that after 4.5 years, we're not going to do that anymore. But it was so great to have you on.
Yeah.
And you're an Enneagram too, and I'm an Enneagram too, and we're helpers. We're naturally motivated to meeting the needs of others, to listening to others, to meeting whatever needs they have. But that comes at an expense for ourselves. So our types have to work a lot harder
Yeah.
at self care, at saying, what do I need? That's an important question for me that I come back to quite a bit. What do I need?
Yeah.
And
I
sometimes it's
often
hard to answer.
I find because I ask women that question a lot. What do you need and what do you want? And I think that what do you want part two, it can also feel tricky. And I love that you shared about how you've been in these different seasons where it felt less accessible. And I feel like I can relate to that. I feel like all women can relate to that. And I also feel like some of the conversations that we're going to get in today around shame and vulnerability and healing are actually interwoven in our capacity to receive friendships like the kind that you're describing. And because it is something, that friendship part that I hear clients talk about a lot, about this longing for friendships that they can really trust and feel safe in and share deep conversations with, I just kind of want to name that it's not just about time. And I know you know that. It's also about your capacity to be available. So you can
Mhm.
ask yourself, what do I need? But if you don't actually believe that that's important and that it matters and that it's worthy, like you're worthy of it, then that answer is not going to do you a whole lot of good, right?
Yeah.
It's that like
Yeah.
inner sense of like, I have the capacity to hold the fact that I will go take the yoga class, restorative yoga class for 4 hours, and that holds tremendous meaning and value for me that ripples out into every area of my life. One of my clients, for example, she would book she loves dog shows. And so she would book that she would go to show her dog, but then she would try to talk herself out of going for like the whole week before, or oftentimes things would come up and she would not be able to go. And so we worked on like getting her to a place where she saw it as non-negotiable, because for her, like that was very important in her life. And so I just want to acknowledge with everybody, like time, yes, for sure. Find and do what you can. Small matters more than big, long chunks. But also it's that like internal sense that something matters that I know you've clearly cultivated because you're leaning in your life.
Yeah. And I think of self-care, sometimes I think professionals talk about it as just caring for yourself, and you have to be alone or in a yoga class, or maybe even you're going to get your nails done or something that someone might name as indulgent, which I don't see it as indulgent, but I see self-care also as anything that's going to be life-giving.
Hmm.
And so if it's life-giving for you to go to the park with your child and play for 20 minutes or sit down on the floor and sing with them, it's about what is going to fill up your cup. And so sometimes we definitely need solitude. We need time alone. We can't listen to that internal voice if we don't have alone time. But I do think the care of the soul or care for ourselves can happen with other people.
Hmm.
And so just that's a thought as well, that self-care doesn't have to be by yourself. It
Yeah.
can be something you do with others. Um,
Right. It could be going to church and just feeling the community of other seekers around you.
mhm,
It could be having
mhm,
that walk with your friend. It could be like warm hugs from my husband and
mhm.
family are, oh, that is self-care for me.
Yeah.
The cuddles, you
Well,
know.
yeah, holding a cat and a cat purring is self-care for me. Sometimes if I just need a little bit of a boost, I have this very loving cat, and to pick up Smokey and
Mm,
just let Smokey purr on my chest for 2 minutes, that's self-care.
it
And
is.
so we can have these, like, micro moments of self-care, and they matter too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And part of what I just want to name for our listeners is that this self-care is also like nervous system medicine. Like my brain's like, oh my gosh, listen to all the great nervous system medicine that we're talking about here too. Because holding that cat, taking that walk, whatever it is, like singing with your children, like there's aspects of like true nervous system medicine that are happening in addition to what's happening. Just, I call it the four pillars in the body and the mind and the spirit and the life. And I just kind of want to name for those of our listeners that are really wanting to drill down on nervous system stuff that like it's there, honey. You don't have to work so hard for it. Hold that kitty cat and let it purr because it's great for your nervous system.
Yeah, and I think even bedtime rituals for me with my kids
Hmm.
are really calming for my nervous system. Just I get excited about that part of the day, getting them to the bed, reading books, singing songs, sometimes saying a prayer. We don't always say a prayer, but there is something about that moment that's very holy and sacred for me. And
Mm.
I think we all have to think about what is it that helps me to pay attention to life and to get excited about those moments. And I mean, this is about mindfulness, tuning into life
Yeah.
and paying attention.
So important. Well, I know that you literally wrote a book called Freedom from Shame, which just brings me so much joy. I
Mhm.
studied Brene Brown. She's been a huge influence in my work. I know she's been an influence for you. And I'd love to bring our listeners into our headspace for a moment and just describe what shame is, because I find that there is so much misunderstanding about what shame is and what it looks like and the difference between shame and guilt. So, would you be willing to speak on that a little bit for
Mhm.
everybody?
Sure, sure. So when we're thinking about shame, shame is this idea that I made a mistake, that I'm not enough, that I don't measure up. Um, if you feel guilty, you're more in a space of I did something wrong. So that's not the same as I am wrong. So it's also important to think about shaming others, how we can talk to our children of you are so bad or you did something bad. Um, so guilt can turn into shame if we're not careful, but guilt is normal, guilt is healthy. Shame is something bigger. And shame loves secrecy. Shame is one of those things, if we don't tell our story, if we don't have friends that we can say parenting is really hard, then you decide, I'm a bad parent. I'm not measuring up. But if you tell your friends, oh my goodness, this was such a hard parenting moment, then they go, me too, me too. You know, that's something you hear Brene Brown talk about, the power of me too.
Mhm.
Now we have to be careful who we tell our stories with. She talks about finding people who can be a vault, who can hold big things for us, and we know that they're not going anywhere, that our words are safe.
Yeah.
But I remember in terms of my own story, my father was an alcoholic, and it was really hard for me to talk with people about that as a teenager. That was something, if I told my family story, then that defined me as well. So not only is my dad a mistake, I'm a mistake too. So my sense of worth was tied up in my family's. And what that turned into for me was trying to clean the house so the house could look good, trying to be responsible, trying to be the good child so that maybe other people would see my family as good. So as a young person, my sense of self was so enmeshed with my family's story and with who they were, I couldn't differentiate and decide, no, like I get to be me. So it took me a while to learn that. But the more that I started talking about my story, the more I became free from that shame. And I'm lucky too that my father ended up going to rehab when I was a teenager, and he really did a lot of inner work and self work. So he found freedom from shame
Yeah.
as well. But it was quite a journey to get out of that secrecy. So secrecy is the big place where um, shame likes to be in the dark. You know, we think about sunlight. Sunlight is where we find that freedom from shame when we tell our stories. So vulnerability, you mentioned vulnerability earlier. That's a really important way to free ourselves from shame. And I would say perfectionism is also something I've struggled with in my life, that, you know, I have to have a perfect space and then I'll be good, because I also grew up in a really messy house. So
Mm,
that was part of my story. And if things are not so messy, then maybe I am good, and my family is good. And so you know, I, in some ways, it was a good thing that I didn't repeat that family pattern of having a messy house, but it also was a place where I was trying to prove myself and earn my worth. And that is where shame is a big thing, is when we're trying to say, you know, I can prove that I'm worthy if I have this space that is great, which is why I love yoga, because yoga is a place where I can go, oh, there it is again. I'm trying to be perfect here in this balance pose, in tree pose, and I'm trying to show that I can do the best version of tree. And then when I fall out of it, then then my ego is going, oh, see, you're not so good. And so for me, I pay attention to that. And then I know what to do to find a soft smile. Like I'm learning, oh, okay, it's there again. I don't think that these parts of us, they get smaller, but they're kind of there. And we have to keep loving on them and befriending them, and paying attention and being curious. But yeah, it shows up, or I'm on my yoga mat and there's just too much intensity. And I hear that still soft voice saying, you can soften. You don't have to be so strong.
Yeah.
Because I was an oldest child, so I was being, strong and protective of my brothers and taking care of them. And so that wiring is there, and I have to keep talking back to it, keep loving on it. But yeah, shame also likes to rear its ugly voice through perfectionism.
Hmm.
Judgment is also a big way that shame shows up. The more that we judge ourselves, the more that we judge others and shame them. And
Yeah.
then, and that can be vice versa as well. So we have to really, I think the more grace we offer to ourselves, the more grace we offer to others. So shame dissipates through grace and through kindness and through really watching that inner critic, because the inner critic can get loud.
Hmm.
So, those are some thoughts on shame, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on shame, and we can keep talking about this.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like I just want to name how important it is because I see this literally. I've never met a woman who doesn't have growth areas around shame in all the years of my practice. So I just want to name for everybody like, this is not a you thing. This is like a very pervasive systemic issue, shame.
Mhm.
And I think we live in this sort of hyper individualistic time of like wellness and health where we focus so much on the individual woman. And yes, like that is where the healing and the power lies. But I also want to name that, like you were talking about parenting and how we parent our kids, but also how we were parented and the environments that we grew up in and how that plays into the shame patterning that we have. And I think shame, what I love about learning about shame is that it gives you a roadmap out of it. Because just knowing about it, just being able to differentiate, guilt is when I did something that feels out of alignment with my core values. Okay, I
Mhm.
don't want to do that again, right? I want to do
Mhm.
this differently. But shame is
Mhm.
that sense that, like, I am bad. I am not good enough. I am a failure. I don't belong. I won't be loved and accepted if somebody sees me or knows me, right? It's that, like, sense that, like, we aren't good enough. And
Mhm.
that just instantly knowing that those are different things. I see so many women, like, their shoulders drop and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all this time I thought that was just like mountains of guilt on me, but what it was actually is shame. And then it's like, okay, well then now we can do something about it, and we can tell the
Mhm.
story. We can recognize it, we can call it what it is, and we can look at how we're going to be more graceful and compassionate. And I love this sort of playful approach that you're describing of being in a yoga class and wanting to do the perfect tree pose and then getting humbled, right? Because we're all getting humbled every day. And then being able to almost play with yourself about it like, oh, there's that part. Oh, there's that part of me that just wants to get it just right and wants to be seen getting it right and, you know, wants to protect
Mhm.
myself from ridicule
Mhm.
that I'm creating in my own mind that doesn't maybe exist in this actual reality.
Yeah, yeah. I think someone said, I don't remember who, but if you have a skeleton in your closet, take it out and dance with it.
Yeah.
And so I see that the playfulness that you can have when you're in your yoga practice being very important, because you're dancing with these shadow parts of yourself, but not with judgment, because mindfulness is always about compassion, right?
Mhm.
And so if we're practicing mindfulness, we are observing our bodies, our thoughts, and our feelings. But if we don't do it compassionately, then it turns into the inner critic.
Yeah.
And then that creates even more shame. So if I'm noticing, oh, there your perfectionist again, then I'm going to be really hard on myself, and
Mm.
it's going to turn into more shame. So observing ourselves is something we have to be really careful with in yoga, because it also could create higher levels of shame. And that's not what we're looking for. So for me, at least, a soft smile or relaxing my shoulders, they're all medicine for the shame.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important for people to realize that yoga doesn't have to be so serious, because we might actually be reinforcing our shame if we come into our yoga practice thinking, okay, we have to be perfect. It's really important to pay attention to how you're showing up on your mat, because that's probably how you're showing up in life.
Yeah.
And if you can smile on your yoga mat, then you can find that soft smile in life when a conversation with your boss goes haywire.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much relevance here about what happens on our yoga mat and what happens in our life and what's happening in our relationship with our body and what's happening when we get that work email where we botch something or whatever it is. Like,
Mhm.
and I think it's so good to know that like we have these touch points, we have these trigger points, all of us, where shame is most likely to rear itself up and to start influencing the way that our nervous system responded and the way that our emotions are responding and the way that our beliefs are coming up. And in yoga, like, so mindfulness really operates a lot on compassion, and yoga really operates on this notion that we're putting ourselves back in our souls over and over again.
Mhm.
So it's this like
Mhm.
soulful union, because when you're in contact with soul or source, it's that like individual soul. Like, yes, I have access to my own soulful self, but also I'm connected to something so much bigger than me and
Mhm.
infinite and hard to even describe. And that is inherently neutral, right? Like it's
Mhm.
such a spacious place to observe oneself from. And it's this gap between the like the identification with the shame and the ability to
Mhm.
observe the shame or to be compassionately with the shame or to just say hi to it or
Yeah,
speak about it to somebody that is a vault, like you're talking about, like that those safe people. I find that telling people about the things that we're ashamed of is, gosh, it's so helpful.
it is so helpful to share our stories, and talking about this higher power, this energy, this union that you're talking about makes me think about yoga and it meaning union or yoke, to connect. And I think often when I come to a yoga, I come as this person who wants to be responsible for others, is a helper, sometimes overfunctions. That's how I'm showing up on my mat. And when I can come into that space and allow myself to be held, that's often a very healing thought for me in my practice, is that Shavasana is a place to be held by my higher power, by even the energy of the people in the room. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I always get there. There are often times where I stay in that autonomy throughout the whole practice.
Mhm.
Uh, but when I do enter with this awareness that this is a practice of connection and connecting with myself,
Yeah.
something really sacred happens, and I no longer have to run the show. So for me, yoga is letting go of control. And that's something, I was the oldest child of two brothers who some of their needs were being missed because my mom was depressed and my dad was struggling with alcoholism. And so I had to take care of everything. And that little girl is still inside of me, and I still have to keep paying attention to her and talking back to her. But when I can come to my yoga mat and let community hold me, the divine hold me, and hold myself, whew, that's
Relief,
magic.
right?
Yeah,
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 it's such a seismic relief.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. So I'm curious.
Which is you are enough. There's a grace in that too. There is the divine telling me you don't have to earn your worth. You don't have to be so responsible. You can let go.
Yeah.
And so that is a healing of shame too, because shame is always about you are not enough. So why don't you prove your worth through doing all these things, through being responsible?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of medicine in that on my mat.
Yeah. I want to just name one thing and then I have a question that I want to ask. I think also that I want to just name for women as they're listening that sometimes shame doesn't motivate people to do. Sometimes shame motivates people to shut down and close off.
Yeah.
And so there
Yeah.
are like both ends of that spectrum. And so it
Yeah.
could be like an immobilization or a deep depression that's really hard to claw your way out of, that shame is actually largely informing that too. And then for other people like Christy and myself, it's like, what can we do? How can we show? How can we prove? How can we help? How can we control this environment so that everything is okay in my world, right?
Yes. And Brene Brown, since you brought her up, she talks about 3 ways that people show up in shame, which is, you said, moving away, retreating, shutting down,
mhm.
and then moving towards, which can be some of the doing, but also the helping and the people pleasing. And then moving against, like, I'm going to move against you. You are bad. I mean, right now, unfortunately, in our news, we're seeing a lot of
Yeah.
that moving against, of naming people as horrible, horrible people. That is, even in just words, an act of moving against. And that also gives me some empathy when I think about some of the people in our administration who are using that language. There's a child in them that did not have their needs met, and there's a lot of shame and a feeling of I'm not enough. And so they're projecting that. That's how they handle their shame. So I do have empathy for that, but it's too bad that there isn't the awareness there, right? And when we have that awareness, to know what we're doing, to know that we're moving against, to know that we're moving away, to know that we're moving towards, then we can, most of the time navigate things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
In the past, if I thought a friend was mad at me, I would text them, I would shower them with compliments. Um, I'm more careful about that now because I know that is moving towards, in a way that I'm trying to validate my own sense of self by doing that. So,
Yes.
so self-awareness really helps when we know, okay, there it is. This is what I'm doing. And I do all 3. I can move against sometimes, I can move towards, I can move away.
Yeah.
But moving towards is my primary way that I have historically handled shame. What about you? Do you see in yourself
I
a
think
way that you've
different.
done that?
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you asked this question. I feel like earlier in my life, it was to move away. So it was really a lot of like hiding and concealing that I was doing. And shame was all consuming for me in that stage. And then I think now it's more moving towards that I do when I interact with shame. Although, I can see all of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there has been like this really marked shift. And for me, moving towards is actually like a sign of my healing in a way that I could even have the capacity to move towards versus
Yeah.
just shrinking, shutting down, closing off. And of course, I think it's just like, what are our triggers, right? Like in a
Yeah.
romantic relationship, I probably moved towards every time, all the time. But when it was something about like I had eating disorders for a very long time, I hid that, or the sexual abuse or the trauma, I hid those things. I would move away.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of it's like our particular triggers that we have and how our shame mobilizes itself. And I think having that self awareness is key. And then having the medicine of these practices like yoga, like mindfulness, like a support system in place and nervous system work, like they actually bring conscious choice back online. Because when
Mhm.
we're in the shame spiral or we're in the nervous system, like we're caught in the tangle of that, we don't have conscious choice. And so all this healing work, all this yoga practice, what it's really helping us to find is conscious choice, that then like our ability to have access to that gets bigger no matter what situation we're in. And of course, in some situations, it's still going to be really small, but
Sure.
we're working on making it bigger in those areas. So I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
love
for
to
sure.
shift gears slightly, still on the shame topic, but I want to know, do you believe that shame is just happening in the mind, or do you believe it's also happening in the body and in the nervous system? And if so, how do you see that playing out in yourself or just in general?
Sure. Sure. You had mentioned abuse a moment ago, and I think that one of the things that happens when somebody is abused is often they dissociate, and that's a way that they protect themselves. There's nothing bad about dissociating. Sometimes there's a negative connotation with that, and people label themselves as not good because they do that. And that's what you did to keep yourself safe in the moment. That's what my clients did to keep themselves safe in the moment. And so I want to honor that. And it also turns into, you mentioned eating disorders, but abuse can turn into gaining weight to protect yourself because the body is bad.
Hmm.
That is something that often happens. That's the messaging with abuse. It's not true, but people say to themselves, I am not good. My body is bad.
Yeah.
And so they leave the body. They leave the body, or they protect the body. They keep it safe. And so healing shame is about getting back into your body and seeing the body as good and loving your body and learning to be still in your body. And things like in yoga, giving yourself a hug in your body.
Yeah.
I constantly feel like that is part of my work. I don't have a, story of being physically or sexually abused, but I still feel like a lot of my needs as a child were missed because of some things that were going on in my home.
Yeah.
And so I was so responsible and helpful to others that I didn't pay attention to my body or my needs. And so as an adult, paying attention to my body, loving it, seeing it as good, seeing it as worthy of kindness. It's so important to healing my shame. So even if you didn't have a story of physical or sexual abuse, you still may have dissociated in some ways.
Yeah.
And it's important to get back in the body. And there's, yoga is one way to do that, meditation is a way to do that, prayer is a way to do that, art is a way to do that, dance is, there's so many ways to do mindful walking. I love how Thich Nhat Hanh, speaking of him, said walk like you're kissing the earth with your feet.
Such a delicious invitation.
Yes, kissing the earth with your feet, just a softness in it, returning to your body. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
It
yes.
did. I mean, it seems very evident for me, and I'm sure for our listeners, that shame is not just in your head, right? It's not just an emotional response. It is probably, you might argue first a body-based response and
Mhm,
a body disconnection. And that a huge part of the healing is obviously being able to acknowledge it and doing the top down approaches of like naming it, seeing it, cognitively understanding it. But a massive part of the healing is also those bottom up approaches of how do I connect with my body? How do I actually understand to feel sensation in my body? Which for
mhm,
women who've experienced sexual abuse, a lot of sensation, there's like a lot of sensation leaving the body,
mhm,
particularly
mhm,
in like certain places, or like very heightened sensation. So how do I experience safe sensation in the body? How do I feel like my body is a good place for me to be in? How do I take up space in the yoga room? Like all these different things of like, and part of what's been so healing for me in my own journey recovering from sexual abuse is feeling relaxation in my body and relief of like that tightly wound sense of hypervigilance melting away. And that is so healing for somebody that is struggling with shame because it's the opposite of what the shame pattern tells you. You're literally experiencing that. And what I love about yoga, in addition to all those other great things you mentioned, is that yoga is working multidimensional in a very focused way. We are working with body, we are working with spirit, we are working with mind, and we are working with you in the system of your life versus just taking a walk. It's great, it's healing, definitely enjoy it. but maybe doesn't access all those layers that yoga is helping us access.
Yeah, I feel like yoga is a spiritual, emotional, and physical practice all at once. And so it really does address all these parts of us at the same time, which is so important. So, yeah.
Yes. Well, speaking of yoga, I know that you have a background as a chaplain for 15 years. You've got some really beautiful and I think somewhat unique perspectives on faith and religion and spirituality that I'd love to hear you talk on. So, first, to start off that conversation, and this all relates back to shame, is
Mhm.
is your view of spirituality. Do you mind telling us about how you view your relationship to spirituality personally?
Sure. I would say that let me start with connection. We talked about yoga meaning to yoke. And I think about spirituality in Christian scriptures. Jesus said that the most important thing was to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And for me, spirituality is about connection,
Mm.
connecting to the divine, connecting to myself, connecting to others, connecting to nature, connecting to my body. So, and I could name other things as well, connecting to meaning and purpose, to your vocation, any form of connection. I view that as spirituality. So I have a pretty broad view of spirituality.
Hmm.
Spirituality is about love, compassion, and connection. When I think about spirituality, another facet of it that's very important to me is grace. There was the theologian Paul Tillich, and he had this very simple little mantra: simply accept the fact that you are accepted. So again, it's not about earning God's love. You are already accepted just as you are. And that grace is not just for you, that grace is for others. So
Yeah.
grace is being held by our higher power. Grace is also giving ourselves that kindness and love and forgiveness. And then grace is for the stranger, the immigrant. Grace is for our neighbor. Grace is for the person at work who drives us crazy. So grace is moving us to understanding and empathy and, again, connection. Another part of spirituality that I feel like is pretty fundamental for me is holding two tensions that I find in the Bible, two things that seem to be saying the opposite thing. And that is, we're made in the image of God, or you might also talk about scriptures that say God looked at creation and said, it is good. And then we fall short of the glory of God. We can name that in different ways depending on what tradition we come from. We can name that as sin. We can name that as shadow. We can name that as even maybe suffering. But we do fall short. We're not perfect, right? Some theologies tend to overemphasize the fact that we're made in the image, that we fall short of the glory of God, and that leads to shame.
Mm.
And then we also could be guilty of overemphasizing our goodness, and that could lead to narcissism. So for me, a healthy theology allows us to hold the ways we fall short and our divine goodness.
Yeah.
And I think that when people live in that, seeing their strengths and seeing their shadow, there's a lot of wholeness in that type of living.
Hmm.
I think alongside that is that we also, as human beings, can overemphasize feelings, negative feelings, or overemphasize positive feelings. And that's a kind of theology as well of let's live in the joy and the peace of God, but forget that, scripture also says, blessed are those who grieve, blessed are those who sorrow, that there's comfort in that. And so for me, theology is also about affirming tears and sadness and pain and suffering. And it's also living in joy and seeing the goodness of life. And if we can hold those side by side, then
Yeah.
we have a healthier theology and a healthier framework for living. Because if we live in just the pain, we're going to have more of a victim mentality. And if we live in just the joy, we're going to become a Pollyanna type who overlooks suffering and how that's there every day. So that's a little bit of my theology and framework for seeing God, for seeing the world, for seeing myself.
Yeah. As I'm hearing you talk about that, what I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that spirituality literally is the fabric of life. It is in all things, everywhere, at all time. It is the constant interaction with the emotion, with the thought, with the annoying person at work, or like we are always interacting with our spirituality. And it seems like it is just this fabric. Like you see it as like this common thread amongst it all. And
Mm-hmm.
I love what you shared about the theology and the extremes of it. And so the fixation on how we fall short and the like goodness of us and how that can
Mm-hmm.
lead to shame and it can lead to narcissism. And I think that for a lot of people that listen to my podcast or grew up in a really strict faith-based community where that way of thinking was believed to be the only way of thinking, the stakes were also really high of like, if I fall short, I will go to hell and have eternal damnation, for example, like that high of stakes, right? And I want to name the sort of like untangling that a lot of people have from shame when it comes to those teachings as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do think that people who have grown up in very rigid systems where, there's the theology of if you don't believe this, you're going to hell. There's a lot of shame in that because there's not permission to play. There's not permission to, there's a lot of rules about sex, a lot of rules about the body. And that leads you to a place of being pretty pent up and not able to have curiosity. We think about mindfulness, and curiosity is a tenet of mindfulness. There's permission to not know. There's permission for mystery. There's permission for gray thinking.
Yeah.
Growing up in a theology that is fundamentalist, that says this is the right way, this is the only way, this is the way to heaven, um, is not allowing you to be a whole person. It is not allowing you to masturbate. It's not allowing you to have fun.
Yeah.
And so you have to deconstruct that. You have to for some people that means leaving faith for a while and leaving these rules, and there might be a coming back to that and there might not. And I think that it's hard if you haven't grown up in that to appreciate how much that damages the soul and how that does lead to a lot of shame, because there's also a lot of secrecy and silence in these systems. There's a lot of submissiveness. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly if there's something in mind you had in that question, but I just think that we underappreciate how much that has an effect on people. And so a theology of mystery and not knowing is so healing, because it doesn't say, you have to have this answer to go to heaven.
And
It's, hey,
belong, right? Your
you
belonging
belong.
is not dependent upon you checking these boxes that someone else decided for you, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of freedom and mystery and not knowing. There's so many parts of my faith that I don't have the answer to, like why bad things happen to good people. And I
Yeah.
certainly feel more comfortable in mystery on that. I mean, I have some ideas about it, but
Hmm.
I know I might not be right. And I think that leaning into not knowing is a really important part of faith. But these systems that want to know do that because they're longing for safety and security. So have some empathy for that. I think that
Mm-hmm.
they come from a place of longing for that, but you can find that inside yourself, and that is something that yoga, you can find it outside yourself from the divine, from safe people, but you can certainly find it inside yourself.
Yeah.
And theologies that say you can only find it this one way, they're
Mhm.
pretty narrow and damaging to people.
For sure. Yeah. And that's been the environment, the context that I grew up in. And so
Uh,
I feel very seen by what you shared. And I want to name that for me, yoga became a place where I could have a high level of connection to soul and spirit, but without all the rules and structure. And so it has been immensely healing for me. And I know, obviously the women that listen to this podcast, you guys like yoga. You ladies like yoga. And so it's probably doing that for them too. But I want to also recognize like there are many different ways to play with your spirituality or to deepen this exploration within the context of a yoga practice and throughout. And part of what I hear you saying is that from your opinion, being able to explore that is part of how women in that situation can heal that shame. Permission to look
yeah.
at it from different angles and to not let that be a core part of your identity. Like, you don't even have to define, am I a Christian or am I not a Christian, for example. It's just, I can be me and I can explore my spirituality. It can be that
Yeah.
simple, right?
Yeah, I think permission, when you've been told this is what you need to do in order to go to heaven, and you've been given a list of these are the rules to follow, to have permission to play, to have permission to ask questions. Who am I? Why am I here on this earth? Uh, to really be a philosopher and have
Mm-hmm.
a chance to not know and to live, in a state of, hey, I get to play with thoughts and not be told this is the way you have to think. This is what is acceptable. I think that, yeah, so embrace not knowing for a little while. And then maybe it's like the poet Rilke said, that we're here to live the questions. And one day in the far distant future, you might live your way into the answers. And I love that, because I think that that's that's what deconstruction can be. It's living the questions.
Yeah.
And then maybe you might at some point decide, I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist. You get to define who you are, but you don't have to do that today. Deconstruction is giving yourself this opportunity to wrestle, to be in a liminal space, to be in a space of not knowing, to live the questions. I think that's really important. And I think I still do that every day, even though I do define myself as a Christian.
Yeah.
I I'm still wrestling with questions every day. There's a reason that the story of the doubting Thomas is in scripture. There is permission in that to not know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll find, a lot of this mystery and a mystical spirit. And so I think sometimes we gravitate to scriptures that support our own theology, and we make God in our own image.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so dangerous, right? But if you read the scripture in context, you'll find a lot of mystery and not knowing, and even tension in it. Of it says this in one place and it says the opposite in another place, because it was written by humans in their own quest for the divine.
Yeah.
And I think if we can be open to how we read scripture, that changes the narrative.
Yeah. I think that's so important, that ability to question. And I'm also thinking of our listeners because I also attract women to this podcast who feel very strong in their faith, whether it be Christianity, whether it be Judaism, whether it be some other faith that they have, Buddhism. And there can be questions about safety to explore. yoga practice or to chant or to do different yoga things because they don't want to either be viewed by other people as blurring the line of their faith, or they don't want to cross some invisible line in themselves where they engage with yoga in a way that goes against their faith.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts upon that? I mean, for me, it seems like a very rigid ideal that's rooted in fear, but I'd love to hear your thoughts around how you wrestled with that? How have you worked through that, and how do you see it?
Yeah, I think about yoga as a practice. So I think when I am teaching yoga, that I'm a guide, but I invite my clients in the class to do things the way that they need to do it so that they can find their own inner guide, so that they can find their own internal voice. Otherwise, just like they might with a preacher in the church, they're looking to me as the authority instead of finding their own internal authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so I give people permission to, not do anything that feels uncomfortable in their body, so that they can work on creating safety for themselves. And
Yeah.
I probably overstate it more than other teachers, and that might annoy some people, but I remind people you can keep your eyes open, you can close your eyes, you can do shavasana on your back or in
Mm-hmm.
seated meditation or in child's pose, so that people know they have agency, so that people know they get to choose. And so I think that that's important with things like chanting and saying Om, because people are where they are, and some of them are going to a Southern Baptist church, and that is where they go because their grandparents go there, their parents go there, and so they're creating their own spiritual identity, but it takes time to shift. And so I guess what I'm saying is, as a teacher, I want to have a lot of patience for the fact that people are where they are and that I have to honor that. At the same time, I want to be very clear that I'm uncomfortable with any theology that says that yoga is of the devil or, wrong. I can watch my newly minted 2-year-old do Happy Baby, and his body just flows into these yoga poses on his own. The same thing with my daughter. I saw that when she was a toddler.
Yeah.
We are meant to move in this way. We are meant to stretch. We see yoga was very clearly a part of Hinduism, but Buddhism as well. Like, it flourishes in all sorts of different cultures.
Yeah.
And Christian theology has a lot of meditation in it. If you look back to its roots, and even how much, I know the word Bible has the word, or in the Bible, the word meditation is in there more than 200 times.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's amazing.
there's chanting as a part of Christian tradition as well. I know I've been to a community in France called Taizé, where they do a type of chanting where they sing songs over and over again. So I would argue that chanting is not just in Hinduism, it's not just in Buddhism, it's a part of the Christian identity as well.
Yeah.
And there are mystics and monks in all of these traditions. We might have different language, but in a lot of ways, our language is very similar. If you haven't read Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, it does a great job of articulating how similar some of the concepts are in our different religions, but we use different language to say similar things. And so I would just say, if you are uncomfortable with chanting, just be patient with all that's unresolved in your heart and give yourself time. And maybe in one practice you chant, and if it feels uncomfortable in the next one, you don't. but just listen to your body and you'll find your inner resources to figure out what you need. And again, it's coming back to that question, what do I need?
Yeah.
But I have a lot of patience for anybody in my class who is just struggling with whether to do that or not, because they are who they are. They're rooted in the culture that they're rooted in.
Yeah.
And some people, eventually get there and chant, but some people feel more comfortable with something like bee's breath and or humming. And so I do offer alternatives like that in my classes
Yeah.
so that people can experience that vibration in their body without doing something that makes them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I do teach more in places like the why and places where I have to be careful because it is a diverse group of people. So yeah, that was a long answer.
I think it really highlights one core theme, though, and it's basically that people can really figure out what they feel comfortable with and they can do that. But I also hear a thread of stay open to exploring different aspects of these practices because you don't know the medicine that they could provide. And one thing that I want to add to that is that yoga actually in no place tells us what to believe. It just tells us to anchor back into our access point for spirituality. And this is what I tell every woman that comes through my practice that has this question is like, yoga is not trying to say, it's not a religion. It's not saying believe this stuff or this God is the only way to access God. It's just like, hey, just get in there with God. Just get in there
Yeah.
with God. And so even if we're chanting like a Sanskrit mantra to Lakshmi, which I like to chant those a lot because they're about abundance and they're about opening up and it's about receiving, it's about this connection. Like you can chant that in a dualistic point of view, you can chant that in a non-dualistic point of view. I teach it from a non-dualistic point of view. And so a lot of it's like, what vantage point are you as the practitioner going to take as you explore these things? And you might, if you're feeling a lot of resistance to this, you might also be experiencing religious shame, but religious
Mhm.
shame in the context of it's not safe for me to explore something outside of what I've been taught my love and belonging and safety is centered in.
Yes. Amen.
I know Enneagram. Oh my goodness, it's such a big world for you. It's a love and passion of yours. And I love Enneagram in particular. I don't know as much about Enneagram to be just totally honest. So if you're listening and you're like, I want Carrie to talk to me about Enneagram, don't ask me about Enneagram. I'm not an expert. But I like that Enneagram in particular does talk about like wounding and shame and these like core tender places that I find out a lot of like personality typing or those models don't speak of as often.
Mhm.
And I'm curious for those of our listeners who do know their Enneagram type, do you see certain types grappling with shame a little more or becoming weighed down by shame a little more often? How do you see the Enneagram in this context of shame and freedom from shame?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll go through the 9 types. If do we have time for that?
Let's not get too far into all the
Okay.
types. However, if you have a favorite resource that you want to tell people, go ahead.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
a lot of the women in my world have heard of Enneagram. They might know their
Okay. Okay. Well, so yes and no. I think that there is what we call the shame triad, and that is the 2, the 3, and the 4. So the helper, and then the 3 is the achiever, and the 4 is the romantic, the artist, the individualist. It depends on which Enneagram teacher you're following, what names they use to describe each of these archetypes. But yeah, this is the shame triad. And so it is also the feeling triad. So there's this deep feeling of, I'm not loved for the 2. And so they're trying to earn their love through helping and through being likable. And then for the type 3, they're trying to earn their love through being successful. And so there's the feeling of I have to prove my value, and there's a real fear of failure with the type 3. And then for the type 4, they're trying to prove their worth through being unique, being different. And yet they also feel like they don't belong, and they feel like a misfit, and there's some real shame in that. And they just want to be seen for who they are, for the beautiful, unique person they are, with their own aesthetic, with their own way of showing up in the world, with all their creativity. They want to be seen for who they are, but they don't feel like they are seen. And so they compare themselves to others. And it leads to a real spiral of shame for the 4. So that being said, that is the shame triad.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the types try to prove themselves in different ways. So anytime that we're trying to earn our value, to find a way that we put on a mask. So the word personality is related to the Latin word mask. So we're trying to say, this is how I need to show up in order to feel safe or to be loved or, prove myself. We could say that in a variety of ways. So each of the types has their own unique way that they're trying to say, I am enough. And so they each have ways that they have to speak back to that fear that they're not enough.
Yeah.
For the 8, they're trying to be tough enough, right? And they need to learn to soften and be vulnerable. For the 9, they're trying to be this mediator and this peacemaker, and they're finding all this harmony in the world and creating it, and that's good. But they're also missing out on speaking up, and they're avoiding conflict, and there's a lot of shame in them. If I speak up, then other people won't like me. For the 7, they're chasing fun and adventure, but they're avoiding pain and suffering inside of them. This is this adventurous type, right? And so I'm only enough if I'm the fun person in the classroom, if they're a young person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think in a variety of ways, every type, the 5, the intellectual observing type, is trying to prove themselves through their competence. And each type has their own mask that they wear and their own ways that they protect themselves. And that is from a feeling of shame that I'm not enough. And so that goes back to your point that shame is universal. And I would say you work with primarily women, and you're right that all women struggle with shame, but I think all people struggle
For sure.
with shame. All of us do. All of us
It's
have
too.
that feeling.
Like I see it in children as well. Even if you try really hard not to have an environment where shame is taught, gosh, it's just there. It's that systemic, all
Yes.
of us relate to it. And so the
Yes.
Enneagram can offer you a mirror to your experience of it. And so for those listeners that are not as familiar with the Enneagram, how would you describe the Enneagram and how it can also show them the opposite spectrum? Because I know that Enneagram gives context to like, this is when you're in maybe a heavier spot where you might be, and this is where you might be when you're in a spot that feels more spacious for you.
Yeah. So the Enneagram is asking you to pay attention. Like, it is a very mindful practice. It's saying, pay attention to your strengths, that your shadow side and your strengths are tied together,
Mm,
right? So my helping nature and my warm, kind heart is a good thing.
yeah.
And it also is very much attached to this part of me that is wounded and that doesn't think I'm worthy of self-care, that doesn't think that I'm worthy of being listened to. So it's not just self-care. I think there was a part of me for a long time that gravitated towards being a chaplain and being a therapist because I got to listen to others versus being able to speak up and share my own authentic voice and know that I was worthy of that same kind of care that I was giving to others.
Yeah.
Mutuality and reciprocity has been something I've really had to work on, is finding that in friendships, allowing other people to take care of me the way that I take care of them.
Yeah.
But
Edge.
this is a practice. I would view the Enneagram also as a practice like yoga,
Hmm.
of moving toward compassion for yourself and compassion for others. If
Yeah.
I can notice that shadow part of myself and be really kind to it and say, okay, you're worthy of care. You're worthy of love. You are already loved. When I can do that and know a little bit about how this is related to my story of growing up in an alcoholic family, when I start to piece all that together and to understand myself, then I'm going to understand somebody who's radically different from me and say, oh, I can have grace for that. I can have grace for a one. A one is a perfectionist or reformer. And if there's a one in my life who always has an opinion and wants to be right about something, I can understand that that's rooted in their own childhood experiences. That's rooted in their own personality. And even though that part of them annoys me sometimes, that feels like they have to be right about religious views or political views or whatever it is, I can have a lot more grace for it because there's understanding of
Hmm.
where that is coming from.
Yeah.
And also just knowing that we all vacillate in the same day. Like I can be doing really well and taking really good care of myself, and then I can go back to over helping, overextending, and missing my needs. So just it is inviting me to pay attention to myself with kindness. It really is a mindful practice, the Enneagram. And when I can do that for myself, I can do that for somebody who's very different from me.
Yeah. It seems like it's a great tool for self-understanding as well. I love things like the Enneagram and the Enneagram because they give us a language to go faster in the direction of our own well-being rather than having
Mhm.
to figure it all out ourselves, you know? Like
Yeah.
it just give me the codes, right? Like show me my stuff, then show me
Yeah.
the other side and like let me just play with how I be with that and how I heal and how I grow and how I exist in that beautiful complexity of what it means to be human and to be fully alive and awake in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we've talked so much about shame, about what it is, about what it looks like, about the multi different ways that it can show up, about how pervasive it is, about your journey some, about my journey some. And I'd love to leave our listeners with what it looks like and feels like and the experience of actually being able to heal shame. And I'd love for you and I to just kind of describe, like, to you, what does it feel like to have healed and found freedom from shame? Even though we are both being very honest that we still relate to it, there's always work to be done. No one is like completed the task of being human and experiencing shame, but also like the liberation from shame. Because just because it's still there, it still comes up, doesn't mean it grabs hold of you the same way. So, what do you
Mhm.
think it looks like to find freedom from shame, emotionally and physically and more?
I think it looks like many things, but I will say this. I was very attached for a while in my life to kind of this helpful archetype of being a humble servant and almost staying off the radar. You talked about me having like a quiet presence. I think for a long time, I did stay off the radar. I wasn't even on social media, which was healthy for me in a lot of ways. I could also talk about how there are some parts to social media that I don't like, but I didn't even get on social media till I was in my 40s. I was never on Facebook. I was off the radar in a lot of ways. So, healing from shame was allowing me to get to a point where I could take up space. It's almost, it brings to mind five pointed star. We practice five-pointed star, I think sometimes is a physical way to represent taking up space.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I was such a helpful person and listening and focusing on other people and making sure that their needs were met, that I wasn't always paying attention to my own. So now healing from shame is, what do I need? It is taking up space in the world. It is getting on social media. For a little while, it was having a podcast with my friend Kat. It was saying that I can speak up. I can advertise who I am. I can name that in the world. And so I think that healing from shame is contingent on our story, what it looks like for each person. But I know for me, as I'm here, I think to talk a little bit about me and my own story, to take up space has been to say my voice matters. It's to say that I get to practice self-care. It's to get a little bigger and be a little bit more of a bolder presence in the world. Maybe not as quiet as I was when you first met me. I definitely think that I stayed off the radar, and there were some parts of that that were related to my own story and needing to heal that shame. So
Yeah.
that's my answer.
Mm. There's so much, it seems like there's more room for all the parts of you. I hear this like sense that you're whole in a way that you always had access to, like it was in there, you've always been whole, but like now you're embodying that wholeness and you're
Yeah.
actually able to live it out in your day-to-day experiences. Yeah.
Yes. What
Mm.
about for you? I'm curious for you. What is
Yeah,
healing for me?
I feel like you articulated that really well. And I'm going
Oh,
to
thank
just
you.
piggyback on that. I think for me, so much as shame healing coming from a fellow too is is about learning to have a self connection with me that leaves lots of room for curiosity and questions and also exploration and just that like sense that I have time, space, agency, choice to tune in and to decide for myself without thinking about everyone else. And then it has also been about letting other people hold me too. So being able to share my story, being able to like with people that I really trust and know, like being able to let them in and being able to not feel a need to always give and do for them, but being able to kind of like witness that and being able to lean in to support. And I will say, part of what has helped me with that is just being knocked on my ass by life because you're like, okay, I'll let people help me. Or suffering so great that you're like, I can't do it this way, so let's figure it out. But what has come for me is this sense of resiliency, and I am much more audacious and bold and unapologetically myself. But I'm also just having a hell of a lot more fun and enjoying my life so much more. I think for me, healing from shame is all of those things and having the skills and resources when it comes up to say, I know how to hang out with you. Let's get into it, shame.
Yeah.
I'm the boss of you as the soul, and you're not the boss of me. So it's this like it's this interaction too of
Yeah.
I interact with shame as a part of my human experience rather than shame covers me in a blanket and suffocates me, right?
Yeah. I love that because it really is a befriending of the shame, but also of our inner child who,
Yes.
because shame always has a starting point and it usually starts quite young. And so there's this young person in us that needs attention and that needs us to sit with it, to hold it, to dance with it. And what I also heard you saying, which has been important for me too, is that shame can also be held by other people in our lives. And that's really hard for people who are high in two, to let other people help us and care for our shame and pay attention to it. I mean, and that's still hard for me. I went to coffee with a friend this week, and we talked about my story more than their story, like what was going on in my life now, but also parts of, my past. And it was hard for me. I walked away from that going, oh, I have to pay attention to the fact that that was hard for me,
Yeah.
the fact that they held more of my story than I. And of course, there have been times when we've gone out for coffee when I've held more of their story,
Yeah.
but it's still something. And that's what I love about yoga, is that it's helping us to pay attention. Oh, that was hard for me. There's some learning in that,
Yeah.
just this lifelong learning.
Absolutely. Sure keeps life interesting. Well, we've talked about it a lot, but I always like to ask, how has yoga been a part of your growth and healing journey? And you could
Hmm.
speak more from the present moment. You might talk about it now, or you might talk about it from more of a past perspective or reflection.
Gosh, there's so many places you could go with that.
Yeah.
Um, for me, rest is really hard for me. I am a doer. I have a schedule.
Hmm.
I love variety is the spice of life, and I have a lot of interesting things in my life. But yoga says slow down. It
Hmm.
says find ease. Because I'm an effort girl. And, some people need yoga for effort. Some people
Yeah.
live life, without as many goals, and they have trouble, getting out of their house, getting off the couch, and they need the effort part of yoga. For me, I need the ease part of yoga. For me, it's something I fight.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a space where I'm not attached to my schedule. I don't have to earn anybody's love or appreciation. I get to go inside and find that internal voice that I like to avoid.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a place where I get to notice myself speeding up when I need to slow down, like doing some poses too fast because maybe my nervous system is not calibrated. And then I go, oh, okay,
Mhm.
let me pay
Mhm.
attention to that. Let me soften.
Yeah.
It's also the community, for a person who likes to hold other people's needs, to be held by a teacher, and also the energy of everybody in the room. I'm getting tearful thinking about it, but I can remember a yoga class where a song was played that reminded me of my dad. It
Mm.
was Love Can Build a Bridge was the song. And it took me back to being a child and loving that song, and my dad loving country music. And my dad had um, died a few years before this yoga class. And when the song played during Shavasana, I wept. And a young man put a hand on
Oh,
my shoulder, and
yeah.
I felt very held by
That's
the teacher,
beautiful. Yeah.
by the classmate. So yoga is a place where I don't have to hold the cares of the world, because I'm a person who has a propensity to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's a feeling of
Mm.
Christy, you don't have to work so hard. It's a reminder um, that I can choose ease, and that I don't have to be in that constant pace of going so fast. And it reminds me to have more space in my schedule. When you find it on the mat for an hour or however long you're there,
Yeah.
you're forced to reevaluate and say, maybe I need a little more space in my life.
Mm.
And so it's a practice that grounds me, that slows me down, that keeps me curious, and that allows me to be held by God and others, and even by myself, in a way that uh, nowhere else does that. And even church, I have a great appreciation for for it. There's a way that I'm held in that as well,
Yeah, of
but
course.
not in the same way. There's something about moving physically in your body, breathing, and just being curious, and not having any outside noise
Hmm.
that is very healing.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. And it's evident how incredibly potent yoga has been and is in your life. Christy, will you tell everyone the name of your book so that they can go and grab it if they want to?
Sure. It's called Freedom from Shame. Freedom from Shame. And I will also say that um, my website has a lot of articles about grief, about shame, about the Enneagram. So that might be another place you want to check out: www.mindbodyandspirit.com.
Amazing. And I will put the link for that down in the show notes, everybody. So don't scurry to grab a pin. You can just click the link below. Christy, it has been amazing to have you on today. It's been such a treat to sit across from you. Thanks for digging into some pretty heavy hitting topics with me that, not everybody has the capacity to get into. You just got right in here
Yeah.
today. I love it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this podcast. I'm going to keep tuning in. So I appreciate it. I do see you as a yoga and spiritual mentor to me and to a lot of people. And so thank you for this gift, because I know firsthand a podcast is a lot of work. So thank you.
You are so welcome, love.